grocery bag to carry it back home?
I could put it in my bag with my books, Caroline, I think.
Whichever. I can get you a bag.
It's coming. Okay. Okay. Maybe see.
You're welcome.
Is your mom gonna get to come?
Yeah,
When she gets back.
when she gets back, yeah, she's currently in Southridge, but she's planning on coming.
Yeah, that's good. I got, these things. Flash drive. And my pencil. Better have that. Alright. It was in there when I left home. There it is. While we were coming, we had to stop and take some pictures. Because, did you see it when you came? The cloud with the silver lining?
I didn't see anything.
Okay. You've been here for a while, haven't you, though?
No. Well, they're like about a quarter after or so.
That was before us.
Well, where should we start?
Oh, pretty.
You took at least 12 pictures, I
I
think.
imagine.
Now, film's pretty cheap in these things, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is.
We didn't know which one was gonna be the best, so.
Better go that way.
The sun was just shining right out of there. The dark clouds. There's the big sign that I had last week up by my.
I see two, yeah.
Wanna see this?
Oh, that's a pretty one. That's the last one you took, isn't it?
Or the first one.
Well, this is when we're in
Oh,
the
is
parking
it?
lot.
Okay.
I mean, in the playground. I
Okay,
think.
yeah, you think you're right.
That's not the playground. Mm.
That's what it was.
The first ones are the prettiest because the sun is
Was
peeking
the
out more,
brightest.
yeah.
Mhm.
That was
More
one by your
contrast.
house.
Oh, thunder.
Mm-hmm.
hose.
Oh. You gotta share that too.
I could. Here's what I got for my birthday.
Well, you ran into a pole?
Not a pole.
Huh?
It had 4 feet.
Huh?
It had 4 feet.
Oh, you ran
in-
into a deer?
I didn't, but we did. I wasn't driving.
Oh,
Oh, boy.
wow.
Where was that
Up by Steve Custer's.
That would've
at?
been.
Oh, just right out of town?
Yeah, like half a mile out of
Stupid
town.
things.
Well, I know that my mom's Prius, the passenger side fender, somehow managed to, this was earlier last week, it managed to come off, and then we duct taped it back together. And somehow during the visit, when Mom was visiting Kevin, it disappeared. The passenger fender.
Oh my gosh.
So even though the duct tape was
Yeah,
Gorilla Tape, didn't keep it, well, there hadn't been the wind directly how it did, just,
got
and
underneath.
they got underneath it and it was gone.
Well, that'll just be a fender on your car then. Or not?
What?
Hopefully that'll just be a fender then, or, no?
That'll be,
It was into the engine compartment?
well, no, it's just cosmetic, but it's more
Yeah.
than the fender.
Well,
It's
yeah,
on
but if it
front
was
too,
in the
but
front of the grill, then that pushes
Oh.
the radiator back
No,
into the
yeah.
fan,
It didn't,
ruins all
Yeah.
that and stops the motor. And
no, it still runs.
It
It's
looks
still-
like it was just on the fender, so
Yeah,
that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's all the lights in the front and the
Oh.
side, but not the interior.
It looked, I thought it looked like it was the back, but it's the front.
Front right, yeah.
Okay.
Door's still open and shut.
And I didn't get back on the door. So that's a good thing.
Well, push the fender back and then that locks the door.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I couldn't have gotten out.
Oh, you'd have climbed over.
Well, yeah. I mean, I couldn't have gotten out that day. No, we were very fortunate. Nobody got hurt,
Yeah.
except the deer. He's still lying down in the ditch over there.
Did you
Right,
drive by
Custer's.
and see it?
Oh,
Not
You didn't know
recently.
where it was?
No, when we went that direction another day recently, and it was still there.
Okay. Who cleans that up?
Coyotes and eagles and,
You mean they just leave it there and nobody takes it away somewhere, the deer?
no,
Really?
yeah. Oh,
Well, sometimes if it's on.
nature's pretty efficient.
Yeah,
Have it leave all the bones and,
Dogs get those.
coyotes.
Coyotes. My sister always had dogs out there that always dragging up pieces of deer.
hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it used to
Talking
be,
is-
well, there still is, if you hit one and the sheriff gets out there right away, he'd have a list of people he could call and they'd come out and get it,
Yeah.
process it, eat it.
Right,
But I'm sure they still do that, but,
yeah, we didn't. It was 6:15 in the morning, 6:30. We thought we were gonna need, well, we were going to Waterloo to take Wendy to a doctor's appointment in Iowa City.
mhm.
And we got back, and she called and she said she'd been sick all night, she couldn't go anyway, so,
Mhm.
anyway. But we're not telling Wendy what happened about the car. We don't want her to worry about it. Think it was her fault that.
Yeah.
So anyway. But. Okay, this is the 7th, so it says. I'll at least find my.
Well, anyway, I thought we'd start last verse in chapter 8 and go on into chapter 9 is my plan.
Can you hear the thunder, Mike?
Okay.
Can you? Do you like it? I like it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's something about a good old thunderstorm that just kinda, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's probably that big old cloud that had the shining around it,
Shiny
because it
rays.
was up there pretty high in the air.
Okay, well, I'll start reading in chapter 8, verse 13. I'll get the text out and then generate a prayer. So in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Now even the first covenant had regulations for worship and an earthly place of holiness. For a tent was prepared, the first section in which were the lampstand and the table and the bread of the presence. It is called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a second section called the most holy place, having the golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden urn holding the manna, and Aaron's staff that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. Above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail. These preparations having thus been made, the priests go regularly into the first section performing their ritual duties, but into the second only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, and not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the unintentional sins of the people. By this, the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy places is not yet opened as long as the first section is still standing, which is symbolic for the present age. According to this arrangement, gifts and sacrifices are offered that cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper, but deal only with food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until the time of Reformation. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, even through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the sprinkling of defiled persons with the blood of goats and bulls and with the ashes of a heifer sanctifies for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. Since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. Therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of the calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded for you." And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Thus, it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself repeatedly, as the high priest enters a holy places every year with blood not his own. For then he would have had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him.
Yay.
Yay. Well, let's pray. Father, be with us this evening. Look into your word here. You've already given us encouragement and hope that you will come to save us, because we are eagerly waiting for you. We say that from our heart, God. We express that with our emotions, God. That is our desire. Come, Lord Jesus. Come. Amen. Okay. Well, we've got some more of this comparison of the Jewish traditions and rituals and temple and sacrificial system of Christ. This kind of continues on and comes at it from different angles and perspectives, but it's all in the context of the Jewish temple and sacrificial system. It seems so foreign to us today, but at the time of this writing, it was on the front burner. We don't want to ignore it because it's very relevant to us as well. Because the imagery may seem outdated, foreign to us, but the problem that it's remedying is still with us in our so-called advanced civilization. We have done nothing to eliminate the problem that we want to address tonight, which is the problem of a pure conscience. Probably heard that word several times in the reading here. Consciences. That's theme tonight. But that's the, problem that needs to be addressed, and it is indeed timeless. As much as we think we've advanced in our knowledge and our technology and medical advances, we have not made any progress in cleansing a conscience. It's still a problem. So, these truths are timeless. God used this Jewish sacrificial system to illustrate timeless truths, and his illustration was very good. So, we'll start here at 8:13. Verse says, "And speaking of a new covenant, he made the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old, ready to vanish away." The whole Jewish system was made obsolete because Jesus paid the price for the sins of his people and also ushered in the new covenant. God's law moved from outside inside believers. So there is no need for the Jewish system. It has been fulfilled in Christ. Hebrews was written sometime before 70 AD, and the temple system was still in operation. The sacrificial system, the priests, and all that business was still going on. When this book was written, this is after Christ's ascension. So it says here, what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. So at the time of this writing, it hadn't vanished yet, but it is becoming obsolete and growing old. And in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed and completely wiped out. It was pretty much left in the state it is today, which is not there. And then it did vanish away, but this was after. This was about 90 AD, the Jews held a whatever the Jews hold, convention or something. They've got a word for it, I don't know what it is. But they because this was a problem, there was no temple. And we had for 20 years and there hasn't been any temple, and what are we gonna do? We're gonna build a temple and reinstate the sacrifices, or what do we do? And they decided to reinterpret the Torah so they could go on practicing their religion without a temple or sacrifices. And the people are blind to this day to that.
So they decided to reinterpret what?
The Torah.
Torah? Okay.
That's where all this stuff is laid out. Hail. One of you two girls. Yours got a
catching the, this is the tail end of it, it looks like,
One of those black clouds.
yeah. That cloud we thought was so pretty. Yeah, maybe over.
Well, maybe he's done.
Don't you love to hear it on the roof?
Just
The room is a neat room to be sitting in. It's great.
Because it's not very far up there. We just hope it doesn't start coming into the light fixture like it did a couple years ago.
So, the change from the first era of the temple to the last days inaugurated by Jesus was not, didn't happen in an instant. It was over a period of time. It's the language we have in verse 13 there. So, something else I was gonna say on that, I can't remember what it was though. Well, that just, one thing you could say is that just shows how God works in a lot of his timing is not our time. He drags things out, he's got his reasons, and we'll see that again here at the end of chapter 9, where it talks about Jesus coming at the end of the age to put away sin, and it's been the end of the age now for 2,000 years. But again, God's time is not our time. He's got his reasons. And the temple probably foreshadowed that as well, leaving that stand for a while. So, that's better. It's quiet.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's go here, beginning in chapter 9. It says, now even the first covenant had its regulations for worship in an earthly place, for holiness. For a tent was prepared, the first section in which were the lampstand and the table and the bread of the presence. It is called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was the second section called the most holy place, having the golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant covered on all sides with gold, in which was the golden urn holding the manna and Aaron's staff that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. Above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail. This is all the first covenant, it says in 9:1. These preparations having thus been made, the priests go regularly into the first section, performing their ritual duties, but into the second, only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, and not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the unintentional sins of the people. By this the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy place is not yet opened, so long as the first section is still standing, which is symbolic for the present age. According to this arrangement, gifts and sacrifices are offered that cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper, but deal only with food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until the time of Reformation. So they have this first covenant, which is God's law along with all its rituals, food, drink, washings, regulations, we see in 9:10. That is a hallmark of this first covenant. And we also notice that in the tent there was a holy place and a most holy place. There was a separation of these two places within the tent. And that priest go regularly into the holy place. Verse 6, holy place, or they call it the first section. And only the high priest into the most holy place, or the second section, as it says in verse 7, and that was once a year. And then in verse 8 it says that the Holy Spirit indicates, probably ought to mention there that by where it says, verse 8 there, by this the Holy Spirit indicates this author's high view of Old Testament scripture. He attributes it to the Holy Spirit, the institution of these of this first covenant, although it was Moses wrote it down and instructed the people. He sees right past Moses and goes to the source of it and says that it's the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy place is not yet open as long as the first section is still standing.
So talk about the first section,
Well, that's the area of the tent that,
where the priests go all the time.
yeah, every
Yeah,
day they go
yeah,
in there and
okay.
offer their sacrifices
Right.
well, just do their ritual stuff, their washings and their offerings and things like that.
Yeah, because it tells it up here too. I just had the first section where they go in regularly, and then the second section where only the Christ keep holy, the Most High, where only the priest goes once a year.
To atone for the sins of
Yeah.
himself and the people. That's into the second section, or the Holy of Holies.
Yeah, okay.
But it says back in verse 8, by this the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy places. I never read that before, but I just read that this afternoon, and it struck me that's plural.
Yeah, it is.
The way into the holy places is not yet opened. I always read that as place, and assumed it was the second section, the Holy of Holies. No, it's both. It's both. And so, okay, that was interesting. It's both sections are not opened. And, well, who are they not open to?
Anybody but the priests, yeah.
The worshiper.
Yeah.
We see in the last part of verse 9, according to this arrangement, gifts and sacrifices are offered that cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper. So gifts and sacrifices are offered by the priest on behalf of the worshiper because it's closed. And that was just interesting to me. I never dawned on me that the worshiper of God was not able to go anywhere into the temple at all.
Not into those.
Not just into
parts.
the most holy. Okay. And that was in effect as long as the first section stands, which is symbolic of the present age. So then we need to ask ourselves, what does that refer to? Well, that goes back to our discussion we had on chapter 8, verse 13, when we had it to the opening. The present age would be the age that this writer was writing in, this time between Christ's ascension and the destruction of the temple. But the present age would be still the age of the temple and sacrifices. It was still there. So this first section has to come down. Because the way into the holy places for the worshipers of God is closed as long as the first section is still standing. And that's the present age. And the present age he's talking about is the age of the first covenant. The first covenant age. So the first section is symbolic of the present age, which is the age of the first covenant. And the first covenant is marked by the outward rituals. Hi, Debbie.
Hi. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you get rained on?
It got rained on really hard, right outside of Des Moines. They had to have gotten at least an inch. Then I got hailed on coming from Marshalltown.
Mm-hmm.
You got what?
Hailed on.
Oh, yeah.
No, you would have here too, so.
Did it hail here?
Yeah.
Mhm.
A little, not.
This was enough that the road was bumpy
Mm-hmm.
from it. So I don't know, what's a little hail damage with finger damage.
We're in chapter 9.
Okay.
Talking in, we're in, all around verse 9, I guess. Talking about the temple having the two sections, the first section and which is the holy section, and the second section, which is the most holy section. And how they're symbolic as well as real, but they both of the sections are not open in the first covenant era. We learned there in the verse 8, by this the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy places, plural, is not yet opened as long as the first section is still standing, which is symbolic for the present age. present age being the first covenant age before the new covenant age. And the first covenant is marked by outward rituals. And in verse 10, we see that it deals only with food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until the time of Reformation. That's symbolic of that first area in the temple, and it's symbolic of the first covenant. So as long as that first covenant is in effect, then the way into the holy places is blocked for the worshiper. It's got to be done by a representative, the priest in the Old Testament system. And then the second section, the Holy of Holies, is where the high priest went once a year to make atonement for sin. It says that in verse 7, but into the second, of the Holy of Holies, only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, and not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the unintentional sins of the people. So, the Holy of Holies here is where sin is dealt with. But I think that's interesting. Let's see. Is that the what's blocking the entrance of the worshipers from a free communion with God is not the second section, but the first. It says, as long as the first section is still standing, the way into the holy places is not yet open. It's not the second section. So what I infer from that is that sins were atoned for in the first covenant. We talked about that last week, where Jesus' death was effectual, going backwards and forward. And so that wasn't the issue. All of God's people, their sins were atoned for. That wasn't what was keeping them out. It was the first section. It was the law being imposed on them from the outside and expressed in various rituals and washings. It says that according to this arrangement, what I just described, gifts and sacrifices are offered that cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper. At the end of verse 9. That was the problem. Wasn't that their sins weren't atoned for, it was them. We saw that in that quote from Jeremiah, didn't we? For if the first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no need to look for a second, for he finds fault with them. It doesn't say for he finds fault with it, he finds fault with them, the people. They were that was the issue. They were defiled on the inside. They weren't clean. Their conscience wasn't clean.
And the priest went into the Holy of Holies once a year,
Just the high priest.
right, to care for the sins, unintentional sins.
Well, he went out on the Day of Atonement.
Right.
Mhm.
But it wasn't for everything. It was for the unintentional sins. It wasn't for the sins that they knew about, and
Well,
and-
they'd sacrifice for that here and
Right.
there. and
they
maybe-
sacrificed, they gave their sin
Yeah.
offerings for mega kinds of things that they knew about.
But the day he went in was the Day of Atonement, which was paying the price for the sins with blood, and then for his own as well as
Right?
the people he went in with, right? So the problem with the first covenant, or section, as it says in our text here, was it was all external ritual. And that could not perfect the consciences of the worshipers. That's what it says in last part of verse 9. So, we need to look at that, get an idea of what he's talking about here, this conscience. Because that seems to be that was the problem, that was what was keeping people from having access to either or both holy places. Was that their conscience was not perfect or clean. Well, in order to worship God, we need a perfect conscience. Or, I'm going to add another definition here, a pure heart. Get that from Hebrews 10:22. Where it says, "Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water." So here it kind of looks like it's a synonym here for a clean heart. Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience. So the conscience is, an evil conscience is affecting our hearts, and our hearts need to be cleansed, so made pure. So when we talk about a perfect conscience or a pure conscience back in Hebrews 9, that Hebrews 10:22 certainly allows for the idea of that being a pure heart, which sheds some light on that perfect conscience. But it's or just adds a little more clue to where he's going. I wrote down some other text here as well. 1 Peter 1:22. See what that says. 1 Peter 1. Let's see, it says, Peter 1:22, having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart, since you have been born again through the living and abiding Word of God. So, the pure heart is the cause or the enabling of us to love our other people. So the pure heart or a perfect conscience is the enabling power for love. So we give a little clue there. And in 2 Timothy 2:22, it says, so flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. So this pure heart is, again, it produces the righteousness, faith, love, and peace among God's people. Two more. 1 Timothy 1:5. 1 Timothy 1:5 says, the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience. So Paul is saying that the aim of his ministry is love, and that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience. So here again we have the pure heart and the conscience in close proximity. And then in Psalm 24:3 and 4, this is the Ascension Psalm
24,
24,
3 and
3 and 4. Ask a question. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart. So who can stand in this holy place, the temple? But this is the real temple, the one not made with hands. He who has clean hands outwardly and a pure heart inwardly. So we see that that's the way into the Holy of Holies that has been closed off. It requires this pure heart or the perfect conscience. So we need that clean conscience, which is the desire to act honorably in all things. I should have emphasized desire more than I did. That's the key in that sentence. The desire to act honorably in all things. That would be a definition for that clean conscience. And Hebrews 13:18 is a verse for that one. Where the author of Hebrews asks for the prayers of these people. He says, "Pray for us, for we are sure that we have a clear conscience, desiring to act honorably in all things." So this conscience is something deeper than our outward acts. It is a desire to act honorably in all things. And this was not in effect until the new covenant, or as it says in chapter 9, verse 10, the time of Reformation. Well, back in lost my place. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 10 says that this first covenant that deals only with food and drink and various washings and regulations for the body was imposed until the time of Reformation. So, Reformation probably needs some definition. That is the Greek word underneath that is, the first definition is setting things straight. So Reformation can have some baggage with it in our day, but it's setting things straight. But that would be the inauguration of the new covenant, or the ushering in of the last days, or that we're in now. It's a time of Reformation, would be when Christ came. He set everything straight. He came and fulfilled the law.
We must have talked about that before sometime or another, because I've got that written here by Reformation,
Well,
to set things right. So when you were talking about, I don't wanna jump ahead, so just tell me, we'll talk about that later if I'm before. But when they're talking about the first section of the holy place, blocking the people from access to God. So when the curtain was rent in two by Christ, at Christ's death, did that change that? Then there was no first section and second section, there was only one.
yeah, that was symbolic of what was going on. It was played out in the temple there in Jerusalem when at Christ's crucifixion. I don't know which gospel is it, Matthew, that records that the curtain was torn in two from the top
From the
to the
top
bottom.
down,
And,
right.
yeah, that first section has been fulfilled in Christ. He bought that new covenant for us. And the law went from outside of us and was just being displayed by rituals and washings and various acts performed to purify the flesh, to inside. And so now God's law is written on our hearts, and we no longer have it imposed on us. We delight in God's law. We love to do His will. It gives us great joy, and we freely obey Him. Where before it was all imposed on a defiled conscience that grudgingly or out of fear obeyed,
Or out of tradition.
or out of tradition.
So did the Jewish people make a new curtain?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Because they kept on doing what they'd always been doing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe you could do a little research on that and report on
Well,
it.
I don't know that that's ever written anywhere, but
I have no idea. I have no idea.
that's just interesting because
They could have sewed it up, I'm sure. I mean, well, the thing was, probably,
they would even hate to even touch it, I think.
well, it was hundreds of years old.
Well, you would think so.
Okay, well, you've got an old curtain hanging in your house that's 100 years old. It's probably been mended before.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but not to that extent.
So,
But anyway, yeah.
they might have just sewn it up and hung it back up there, and the moths got to it again, and it fell down, and, get a couple of ladies to go in there and stitch it up and hang it. We'll just pretend like nothing happened. And that's what they do, and I mean.
Curious.
And we think sometimes have an idea of something mysterious and holy, and it could have been something just like that. And maybe that's why they never wrote about it, because it wasn't odd. I mean, that curtain was hundreds of years old. It's fallen down before. But we do that, don't we? When
Yeah.
something happens, we'll explain it away.
Yeah,
And, that's just a coincidence. They crucified used that troublemaker up there on Calvary, and it got dark that afternoon. Wow, it was stormy out. Yeah, it didn't rain though.
like it did just a little.
And the curtain fell down. Well, okay, I remember Grandpa saying 150 years ago it fell down back then too, and they had to hang it back up. So, we do things like that. And, that's exactly what they did in 90 AD, that when they got together, and I'm sure it was kind of embarrassing because they had no temple and they hadn't been sacrificing, and the whole system had just crumbled, and, well, what are we gonna do? We gotta do something. And so they just, reinterpreted everything to, where they could, that's what they do today, whatever they do today in their synagogues. They just kind of shuffle the ritual around a little bit, and wrote out the blood sacrifices.
Should have asked Nola those questions, shouldn't
That's going to be in.
we? Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, if you've got somebody that's a rabbi or knows about that,
it wouldn't be, probably not.
well, probably the lay people maybe don't, maybe they do, I don't know. Wouldn't hurt to have. Well, what do you do?
Write her a letter.
We don't have an address,
I think we do.
do we?
Would, I think Barb would.
Well, Barb probably, yeah.
Told Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry. Bunny trail.
Okay. Uh, okay. Well, let's go to verse 11. For when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. So then, that's pretty self-explanatory. Christ appeared as a high priest. A high priest was the one that went into the Holy of Holies. But he also was into the first section. He was a priest. And he secured an eternal redemption. Once for all into the holy places. Once for all is to be translated once and not again. There's a lot of misunderstanding on those phrases in the book of Hebrews. And a lot of people read that once for all, they read it as once for everyone. And that's not the Greek at all. The Greek is once for all time, once and not again. I always like once and not again until we studied there a few weeks ago, and then I like once for all time now. Once that, and it spread from all eternity back and all eternity forward, all once for all time. And in doing that, he secured an eternal redemption, secured an ensured redemption, eternal, forever redemption, secure. It's just, those are good words when you're talking about your redemption and what Christ did. He secured it and it's eternal. And he did that by fulfilling all that was symbolized by the first covenant. It says here, for if the sprinkling, I'm reading in verse 13, for if the sprinkling of the defiled persons with the blood of goats and bulls and with the ashes of a heifer sanctifies for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So he fulfilled all of those rituals that are symbolized by the first covenant. But even more than that, he fulfilled the reality behind all of those rituals and laws. Now, like kinda see what I'm talking about there, we need to go to Matthew, chapter 5, Beatitudes.
What did you say? But more than that, he fulfilled all the,
He
Reality.
fulfilled the reality behind those rituals and
Okay.
laws. He did those rituals and lawful things, the offerings and the sacrifices and the washings, he fulfilled all that, but he fulfilled the reality behind all those things. Matthew's interesting because the whole book, I went through, this isn't in my notes, so I might stumble around here a little bit. I went through and highlighted all these phrases. In Matthew, let me see if I can start finding them. Well, I just bumped up to this one in chapter 8. You don't need to follow along with me on this, but where it says that Jesus heals many, and in 8:17 it says, this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. He healed, and this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. So Jesus fulfills things. I thought that was this Bible, I went through and highlighted all those. Maybe it was on my computer.
Did you highlight Jesus's words in red?
No, that, it came like that.
Oh.
Uh, I must have just did it on my computer and I didn't put it into this book here. But anyway, you read through Matthew and there's a lot of those sayings that this was to fulfill what was written. And Jesus did this to fulfill what was said or spoken by the prophet.
Matthew 5:17 is one.
Yeah. So anyway, that interests me, and there was a line of thought out there that God knows everything and all of history because in some sense it's already happened and he's outside of time and he can see everything in the future as well as the past, so he sees what's gonna happen and then that's how he knows. I don't think that's biblical at all. Things that haven't happened. I think that's just patently obvious. I don't think there's any sense in which they have happened. And when the Bible talks like this, Jesus did this to fulfill, it doesn't, if it were the other way around, it would say something like, Jesus did this as foreseen by the prophets. But it never talks like that. It's always, Jesus did this in order to fulfill what the prophet said. So God doesn't see the future and then plan accordingly. He has a plan, and he makes the future. He writes the future in history. So, I guess when I started bumping into all this was to fulfill statements, that just really hit home for me that God knows the future because he makes the future. And he's that powerful. But anyway, back on track here. Matthew 5, well, yeah, let's just start at verse 17, like Carolyn pointed out, 17 to 26. We're looking at Jesus fulfilling the realities behind those rituals and laws. And it starts out, Matthew 5:17, do not, like Carolyn just pointed out, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. So the law is not some useless ancient relic that Jesus comes to abolish, and it's not some imposition that is weighing us down from the outside that we can't do. Jesus came to fulfill it himself because it's very important and we can't. So Jesus did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Until heaven and earth pass away, not one iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So then he brings in that whatever righteousness we have, it's got to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, or we will not enter heaven. And the Pharisees were pretty righteous people. So there's that's the requirement. But when we go back up to 17, we see that Jesus will fulfill that. And then you ask, well, how would he fulfill that if it says, unless my righteousness? Well, Jesus fulfills it in us. He becomes our righteousness. And then we go on, let's just go on with the anger one here in verse 21. You have heard, this is the law, that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. So the law says do not murder. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. So, if you are offering your gifts at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gifts there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gifts. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you've paid every last penny. So we have right away this righteousness here that's got to exceed the scribes and the Pharisees defined, and it's the law says you will not murder, and Christ says that if you hate, you've committed murder. If you mockingly say you fool, you've committed murder. It's not. It goes much deeper than the act of killing someone. It goes to the desire level.
What does raka mean? In verse 22, my Bible says, and whoever says to his brother, raka.
You fool.
Well, and then it says it right below that, but whoever says you fool.
Oh,
But at first it says raka. That means you fool?
I don't know. Could be. A derogatory term, probably. But anyway, this is something that Jesus came to fulfill. He's laying out the requirements, and they go a lot deeper than what these people have been thinking and taught. You can drop down to verse 43 to 48 of chapter 5 and read the end of it here. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So there's the ultimate requirement, is perfection in our righteousness. And that's how much it exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. It exceeds it all the way to perfection. And so that should leave everyone in a state of despair. Because you think you got a shot at it when it says do not murder. You think you got a shot at that, but then when Jesus goes on to explain the reality, then you know you're sunk. But there's hope there. Jesus says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to Jesus fulfills the requirement of perfect. Jesus has done that. That is what he did on the cross, as he appeared as a high priest and secured our eternal redemption by fulfilling all that was symbolized by the first covenant. And as Christians, we are clothed in Christ and his righteousness. And so his righteousness becomes our righteousness. And in him, then we are seen as perfect. Although we do have an inkling remaining in us that there's a lot of work to be done there. But isn't it interesting that I was thinking about that and how that plays out in relationships to my conscience, and I've got maybe I got a different take on this from some of you in here, because I haven't been a Christian probably for, well, maybe it's been like 30 years now, but I remember when I wasn't. And although I know that I am in myself a long ways from perfect in my righteousness, and I hunger and thirst for righteousness, I truly do. My conscience doesn't bother me in that respect anymore. It used to, before I was a Christian. My conscience would just gnaw on me, knowing that I was defiled and not right, and a sense of dread would well up. So and in a sense, now I realize to a greater degree how defiled I am. I mean, back before that, I was on the level of murder. I haven't murdered anybody, and I was operating on, I didn't mean to say that, but I was on that level of, well, I didn't murder anybody, but my conscience was in there, still gnawing at me. Now, I still haven't murdered anybody, but I realize that when I do have bad thoughts about somebody, or say something snarky to, why do we say snarky things to the ones we love a lot of times? Why do we do that? I don't know.
Because they're there.
I don't know, but that is so hurtful anymore, and but my conscience doesn't well up in there. It's just oh gosh, and just it's a different kind of feeling bad, I guess. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe I'm not making any sense. Maybe I am. I don't know.
I think it has something to do with knowing that you're forgiven and then given another chance.
Yeah, well,
You
my
didn't
conscience
know
has
that
been,
before.
well, what it says in here is my conscience has been sprinkled clean.
Mhm.
It's been cleansed. And that's the reality I experienced. Although my sense of my sin is several times greater than it ever was when I was lost and wallowing in sin, my conscience now is not gnawing at me. Because, I've been washed by the blood of the Lamb, and I'm clothed in his righteousness. And so the righteousness I hunger and long for is an actualized righteousness that is not just imputed to me, but lived out by me. And that's not gonna happen until I get to heaven. I realize that, but that doesn't mean I don't long for it.
Time to take a break?
Okay. Oh, I guess it is.
Is there a reason that the sanctuary lights are all on? Are they gonna be left on?
I've heard noises.
Well, there was somebody that came in before you came in, I think.
Oh, I didn't see anybody in there, but yeah, they
Was
were
it
on when I
you
came in.
in?
Well, yeah, but
Okay.
I didn't see anybody. Maybe they're not on now. I'll go see.
You're gonna check that out.
Because I looked in there and I thought, what, did they extend the open communion hours or? I didn't see anybody there. That doesn't mean there wasn't somebody in
Well, if
there.
it was, they weren't gonna get in, because the church was locked when I got here.
I don't think they were, well, we didn't look in there, so I didn't see lights when we came.
No, I didn't notice it.
in.
I came in. with the kitchen.
Oh, shit.
I looked hot because of the fruit fry. Mine was driving through that rain.
Well, the door's closed now, isn't it? She came in through the kitchen. Oh. So it's.
in the church. That's why the lights are on, Mike.
Who's patching the cement up in front?
Where is his son? He was really good at carpentry stuff too.
I don't know where he is, for sure.
Okay. Three verses 13 and 14. For if the sprinkling of defiled persons with the blood of goats and bulls and with the ashes of a heifer sanctifies for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Here we have a classic Bible argument from the lesser to the greater. Maybe that was a common way the Bible talks. It argues from the lesser to the greater. The lesser being the sprinkling of defiled person with the blood of bulls and goats. The greater being how much more the greater. It's used a lot in Paul's writing. This is not Paul's writing, but it's you see that a lot in the Bible. Just a little aside there. It's a way of arguing. But the blood of bulls and goats only purified the flesh, it says here, the outside. But much more, the blood of Christ purifies the conscience, be on the inside. From dead works to serve the living God. Dead works mean anything, works of no eternal value. Not necessarily evil or nasty, they could be very altruistic or good works, but they are no eternal value because they're not emanating from a pure conscience.
So the pure conscience has Jesus in it,
That's what?
Jesus in it,
Okay.
because,
Yeah, but its object is a love of Jesus. It would be more
okay, yeah,
accurate.
in
It's not
that-
Jesus in us, it's
No,
a love
in the
for
deed.
Jesus emanating from our inner being,
Mhm.
which animates our actions,
That
that
side.
governs our actions. It's the motive behind our good works.
Yes,
Yeah, is a love for Jesus. That has been put there by Jesus, purchasing the new covenant in his blood for us. His laws, God's laws have gone into us. And at the head of God's laws are the love of the Lord. That's the first law. Love the Lord with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your mind, and all your strength, every soul, external, your actions, and internally, your thoughts, all love of God. And that's the what Jesus bought. That's the new covenant. The internalization of God's laws. so we act out of a pure conscience. And those could be actions that the world deems hateful. In the Methodist Church now, when there's few people that speak out against the embracing of sin, open sin, and that's viewed by a significant portion within the church as hateful. And it could be, for some people, that could be just a hate for people that are different. But for the true Christian, it's loving, because it's emanating from a heart of love. Love for God's word, what he's spoken, and we take that seriously, the consequences of sin, and a love, and that what flows out of that is a love for people. We don't want them to perish, and for heaven's sake, we don't want to encourage them in their demise. We are screaming, wake up, get off the tracks, there's a train coming. And it's out of love. It's out of a pure conscience, clean conscience. Although it could look hateful to the world, and probably will in that respect. But Christ offering himself up purifies our conscience from those dead works to serve the living God. So as Christians, we do serve God, but it's a different service than a lot of people have in mind. A lot of people's services done to curry favor or to earn respect, or out of the fear, like a slave serves his master, that kind of service. But we serve God out of the same way we serve someone we love. We want to. It gives us joy. Verse 15, therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promise in eternal inheritance. I'll stop right there. For whom did Christ mediate the covenant?
Mediate.
Hmm?
I'm thinking of the meaning of the word mediate. Is that the word we need to think about?
No, I just asked a question. For whom did Christ mediate the new covenant? For whom did he mediate that new covenant?
For those who are called.
Yeah, for those, it says there. Therefore, he is a mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. I just wanted to bring that out, that for whom did Christ mediate the new covenant? Those who are called. And we don't want to skip over some of those little unimportant looking words, do we? That's important. And we want to say, well, I want to know who the called are. What is this called? wanna be in that group. Because if you're not in that group, then it looks like Christ did not mediate a new covenant, and you will not receive the promised eternal inheritance. So we're gonna look at who are the called. Hebrews 3:1. Turn back a couple of pages. It says, "Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus." So we see from that the call emanates from heaven. It originates in heaven. And it's something to do with their holy brothers. And they share in this heavenly callings. So this calling, the heavenly calling, it emanates from heaven.
Where was that?
3:1.
3:1.
Hebrews
Oh,
3:1.
yeah, and I'm just looking at 1:3.
Oh, it's two.
Well, maybe I said 1:3.
No, I have 3 written down, but I'm
I do that a lot.
I have verse 1 written down.
Well,
but I
we're
thought-
done with Hebrews 3:1 or 1:3.
Whatever it was.
I just wanted to point out from there that where's this calling come from? It comes from heaven. And then we can go to Romans 28:30 for the rest of it. It's elsewhere, but 28 through 30 is really pretty plain here. So the call, this call that emanates from heaven has a goal or a purpose. We see that in Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So this call emanates from heaven, and the call has a goal or a purpose. It says here, they are called from heaven according to his purpose. And what is that purpose? Well, keep on reading in Romans 8:29, for those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And so, conformity to the image of God's Son is the purpose of this call. And then in verse 30 of chapter 8 of Romans, it says, "And those whom he predestined, he also called, and those whom he called, he also justified, and those whom he justified, he also glorified." So God predestined all of this, because it says, those whom he predestined, he called. So all those that he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, he called. This is the call that emanates from heaven. And all those whom he called, he also justified. And all those whom he justified, he also glorified. All of this is the golden chain of salvation. A lot of people refer to this as. This is not one of these links is missing. They're all joined together. And they're all in the past tense, which I always think is interesting, because I'm seen as justified and glorified, past tense. It is so sure that it's, can be stated as already being accomplished, even though I know.
Where are you reading that from, Mike?
Romans 8:28 through 30. But I'm
Would
just,
you call it golden chain of,
pardon?
it's the golden chain of,
Salvation.
Salvation, yeah. Those aren't my words, that's just how this is commonly referred to throughout history. I don't know who first coined that. But those, there's what's behind, that's what's behind that word in 9:15. Therefore, he is a mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. So that little word there is called is pretty important, pretty rich. And then it goes on here and in Hebrews 9, the second part of verse 15, and starts speaking about this, maybe some of your versions are different, but a will or a testament or a covenant. It's all the same Greek word. Covenant and will, like last will and testament, all the same Greek word. So that's where this is coming from. It says, since a death, the second part of verse 15, has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant, for where a will, same word as a covenant, for where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. Therefore, not even the first covenant, or will, was inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, this is the blood of the covenant that God commanded for you. And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. So he kind of goes into this long analogy here of a will, and draws out inferences for the covenant or the will that Christ bought. So knowing that, it's the same word. It's different in Hebrew, but it's the same word in Greek. We can see where it's coming from. Otherwise, it just kind of, oh, what's this mean? Why is he switching over? That's why. So we can ask now, when we see where he's coming from, what this will, because a will back then apparently is pretty similar to a will right now, the way that sounds here.
Mm-hmm.
And what's a will? Well, it deals with inheritance. Who gets what? That's what a will deals with now, and that's what dealt with back then, and that's what he's talking about here. It's an inheritance, who gets what. And it's unilateral, it's non-negotiable. We don't, go to the lawyer's office and sit there and the last will is over, I don't know, I seen it in the movie though, so I assume that's what happened. We don't start negotiating, we just find out who gets what. So. Okay. Yeah, I didn't write down any more on that section in the house. So death implies blood. I guess we can see that from that, glean that out of there as well. The shedding of blood brings death. That's why we have these, everything sprinkled with the blood of the bulls and the goats. Because the covenant or the will had to be in effect, and it couldn't be in effect without a death occurring. And that death was in the first covenant done with animals, sacrifices. So he's establishing that a will or a covenant cannot become in effect until the one who makes it dies. And that's why the blood of bulls and goats could never do what it pictured. Because it wasn't the bulls and the goats' inheritance these people were inheriting. It was a forgiveness of their sins from a holy God. And so it was obvious to them, as it should be to us, that the bulls and goats' death wasn't going to cut it. It had to be just an image of something else. And that something else was God becoming man and coming to earth to give himself as a sacrifice, and thus dying, and thus ratifying the will. For without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of sins. There can be the will cannot be in effect until there is a death. There can be no forgiveness of sins. There can be no inheritance. And so we had to have the death of the one who made the will. And that's what we have. verse 23 then, chapter 9. Thus, it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself repeatedly, as the high priest enters a holy place every year with blood not his own, for then he would have to have suffered repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So, one thing we can notice there in verse 23 is that it seems like heavenly things need to be purified. Thus it was necessary for the copy of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, this blood of the bulls and the goats. But the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices. But the heavenly things themselves needed to be purified with better sacrifices, is what it's saying. That seems kind of odd. Heavenly things need to be purified. What's that? Well, it says that he, Christ, entered into heaven now on our behalf, it says in verse 24, to put away sin. It says in the second half of verse 26. So we see what the problem is there in referring to heavenly things that needed to be purified. We ask, what's that? Well, it's me. I'm the problem in heaven. I'm what needs to be purified. If I go to heaven with only my sins forgiven and not my conscience pure, I will defile the place. Because I'm not, because my thoughts are not always pure thoughts. My thoughts are not always God's thoughts. And if I only go in with just my sins forgiven and washed by the blood of Christ, but not changed on the inside, then that's a problem. So that has to be dealt with as well, and it has been dealt with, because it says in verse 26, Christ appeared once for all time to put away sin. Well, it doesn't mean that he atoned for my sins. It said he put away sin, singular. That is what is corrupt in me. I do sins. I am a sinner. I sin because I'm a sinner. It's Christ atoned for our sins. He also needs to get rid of this, or put away this evil thing called sin. That's what it says in verse 26. For 26 6b, but as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the age to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Sin is an evil, he's an evil, powerful force that God allowed into the world and Christ has put away. That struck me as kind of, if sin is as powerful and as evil as the Bible describes it to be, then dealing with it, I would not have wrote put away. I would have wrote crushed or destroyed or cast into the darkest regions of hell, never to be seen again. But he put it away. He put it away. It's just it seems like such a light thing for him to do. It's like I just put everything away.
He got it out.
No big deal, I just put it away. But it is a big deal because
It's a big
it says he, I gotta find it here. He put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. It was a big deal. It was very costly. But in and of God's self, it wasn't at all hard to do. It wasn't something demanding where he had to sweat a lot to put it away. But he did it in such a way that it was immensely costly. He could have just said, sin be gone. That would have put it away. I mean, Jesus did that all the time with demons. Be gone. Go out of her. He spoke, and he spoke the whole world into existence. See, that's the way he operates. He could have said, be put away, and it was gone. But he did so much more than that. And he did it in such a way that it demonstrated his love for us in sending his Son as a sacrifice for our sins. So he demonstrates his love for us in that. If he would have just said, go away, then we'd never know the depths of his love for us and the depths of our corruption towards him. And it took the death of his Son to demonstrate. So we have this, I think it's just a very curious phrase, put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. It just seems like it just doesn't quite go together, but it does when you talk it out and think it out. And we realize that God was the one that allowed sin into the world in the first place, in order to put it away by the sacrifice of his Son.
Part of the plan.
Part of the plan. So it isn't, we sometimes get this idea there's a great cosmic battle and the outcome is in the balance between good and evil. And we don't know. And they're pretty even, pitted against one another. That's not the idea at all. God brought sin into the world and God put it away.
So it says at the end of the ages.
Mm-hmm.
Do you wanna talk
Yeah, last page, maybe. He did it, it says at the,
Well, we talked about the new, a new age, or a new, until the time of Reformation.
yeah.
But I didn't know what the age is.
Well, the end of the ages is another word for last days. The consummation of the ages, I think some translations use that. And that's even a more difficult word to try and get your theology around, because we don't see it put away. We didn't see it put away 2,000 years ago, and 2,000 years later, we still don't see sin put away. But we're living in the last days and the end of the ages. There was a sense where sin was dealt with, put away. Christ decisively leveled a death blow. He defeated death by rising from the dead. He defeated death in us by buying the new covenant for us and moving in us through His Holy Spirit. So there is a sense sin is put away, but there is a real sense where it's not. Look around. And why did He do that? And God has extended the end